Hello and welcome to part 2 of our July summer adult storytime story. We are reading Head, Scale, Tongue, Tail by Leigh Bardugo, and it is featured in Summer Days and Summer Nights, 12 Love Stories, edited by Stephanie Perkins, an anthology of awesome YA love stories set during summer. So here we go with part 2. Scales. The something amazing was a dusty room in the basement of the library, packed with old vinyl record albums, a turntable, and a pile of headphones tucked into a nest of curly black cords. "I'm so glad it's still here," Eli said. "I found it right before Labor Day, and I was afraid someone would finally get around to clearing it out over the winter." Gracie felt a pang of guilt over not spending that last weekend with Eli, but she was also pleased he'd been waiting to show her. "Does that thing work?" she asked, pointing to the column of stereo gear. Eli flipped a couple of switches and red lights blinked on. "We are go." Gracie slid a record from the sleeves and read the title, Jackie Gleason, Music, Martinis, and Memories. What if I only want the music? We could just listen to a third of it. They made a stack of records, competing to find the one with the weirdest cover. Flying toasters, men on fire, barbarian princesses in metal bikinis, and listened to all of them, lying on the floor, big black headphones hugging their ears. Most of the music was awful, but a few albums were really good. Belladonna had Stevie Nicks on the cover, dressed like an angel tree topper and holding a cockatoo, but they listened to it all the way through twice, and when Edge of 17 came on, Gracie imagined herself rising out of the lake in a long white dress, flying through the woods, hair like a black banner behind her. It wasn't until she was pedaling home, stomach growling for dinner, singing ooh baby, ooh, that Gracie realized she and Eli hadn't talked about Idgy Pidgy once. Though Gracie hadn't exactly been keeping Eli a secret from Mosey and Lila, she hadn't mentioned him either. She just wasn't sure they'd get him. But one afternoon, when she and Eli were eating at Roddy's Red Hot, a horn blared from the lot, and when Gracie looked around, there was Mosey in her dad's Corolla, with Lila in the passenger seat. "Don't you only have a learner's permit?" she asked, as Mosey and Lila squeezed in on the round benches. "My parents don't care if I'm just coming down a little spindle, and it means they don't have to drive me. Where have you been, anyway?" Mosey glanced pointedly at Eli. "Nowhere. Uveneers, the usual." Eli said nothing, just carefully parceled out ketchup into a lopsided steeple by his fries. They ate. They talked about taking the train into the city to see a concert. "How come your family doesn't stay at Greater Spindle?" Mosey asked. Eli cocked his head to one side, giving the question his full consideration. "We've just always come here. I think they like the quiet." "I like it too," said Leila. "Not the lake so much, but it's nice in the summer when Greater Spindle gets so crazy." Mosey popped a fry in her mouth. "The lake is haunted." "By what?" asked Eli, leaning forward. "Some lady drowned her kids there." Lila rolled her eyes. "That's a complete lie." "La Llorona," said Eli, "the weeping woman. There's legends like that all over the place." "Great," thought Gracie. "We can all start hunting ghosts together." She tried to ignore the squirmy feeling in her gut. She'd told herself that she hadn't wanted to introduce Eli to Mosey and Lila because he was so odd, but now she wasn't sure. She loved Mosey and Lila, but she always felt a little alone around them, even when they were sitting together at a bonfire or huddled in the back row of the spotlight watching a matinee. She didn't want to feel that way around Eli. When Mosey and Lila headed back to Greater Spindle, Eli gathered up their plastic baskets on a tray and said, "That was fun." "Yeah," Gracie agreed a bit too enthusiastically. "Let's take bikes to Robin Ridge tomorrow." "Everyone?" The furrow between Eli's brows appeared. "Well, yeah," he said, "you and me." Everyone. Teeth. Gracie couldn't pinpoint the moment Eli dried out, only the moment she noticed. They were lying on the floor of Mosey's bedroom, rain lashing at the windows. She'd gotten her driver's license that summer, and her mom's boyfriend didn't mind loaning Gracie his truck once in a while so she could drive up to Greater Spindle. Gas money was harder to come by. There were better jobs in Greater Spindle, but none that were guaranteed to correspond with Gracie's mother's shifts, so Gracie was still working at Uveneers since she could get there on her bike. It felt like little Spindle was closing in on her, like she was standing on a shore that got narrower and narrower as the tide came in. People were talking about SATs and college applications and summer internships. Everything seemed to be speeding up, and everyone seemed to be gathering momentum, ready to go shooting off into the future on carefully plotted trajectories, while Gracie was still struggling to get her bearings. When Gracie started to get that panicked feeling, she'd find Eli at the Dairy Queen or the library, and they'd go down to the Hall of Records and line up all the Bowie albums so they could look at his fragile, mysterious face. Or they'd listen to Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas while they tried to decipher all the clues on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's. She didn't know what she was going to do when the school year started. They'd driven up to Greater Spindle in Eric's truck without much of a plan, radio up, windows down to save gas on air conditioning, sweating against the plastic seats. But when the storm had rolled in, they holed up at Mosey's to watch movies. Lila and Mosey were up on the bed, painting their toes and picking songs to play for each other, and Gracie was sprawled out on the carpet with Eli, listening to him read from some boring book about waterways. Gracie wasn't paying much attention. She was on her stomach, head on her arms, listening to the rain on the roof and the murmur of Eli's voice, and feeling okay for the first time in a while, as if someone had taken the hot knot of tension she always seemed to be carrying beneath her ribs and dunked it in cool water. The thunder had been a near continuous rumble, and the air felt thick and electrical outside. Inside, the air conditioning had raised goosebumps on Gracie's arms, but she was too lazy to get up and turn it down, or to ask for a sweater. "Gracie," Eli said, nudging her shoulder with his bare foot. "Gracie." She heard him move around, and when he spoke again, he had his head near hers and was whispering, "That cove you like doesn't have a name." "So? All the little beaches and inlets have names, but not your cove." "So let's name it," she mumbled. "Stone Crescent?" She flopped on her back and looked up at the smattering of yellow stars stuck to Mosey's ceiling. "That's awful. It sounds like a housing development or a breakfast roll. How about Gracie's Archipelago?" "It's not an archipelago." "Then something good. Something about Idgy Pidgy, Dragon Scale Cove, or the Serpentine." "It's not shaped like a serpent." "Beastmouth Cove," she said. "Beastmouth? You trying to keep people away?" "Of course, always." Silverback Beach." "Silverbacks are gorillas." "Silver Scales, something that starts with an S." "Shoal," he said. "Oh, perfect." "But it's not a shoal." "We can call it Eli's Last Stand when I drown you there. You're making this impossible." She flipped back on her stomach and looked up at him. He was propped on his elbows, the book open before him. She'd had another suggestion on her lips, but it vanished like a fish slipping free of the line. Mosey and Lila were talking in low murmurs, tinny music coming out of Lila's phone. Eli's t-shirt was stretched taut across his shoulders, and the light from the lamp by Mosey's bed had caught around his hair in a halo. She could smell the storm on him, like the lightning had followed him home, like he was made of the same dense rain clouds. His skin didn't look damp. It seemed to gleam. He had one finger on the page, holding his place, and Gracie had the urge to slide her fingers over his knuckles, his wrist, the fine blonde hair on his forearm. She reared back slightly, trying to shake the thought from her head. Eli was looking at her expectantly. "The name should be accurate," he said, his face serious and determined as always. It was a lovely face, all of that thoughtfulness pushing his jaw forward, making that stern divot between his brows. Gracie said the first thing that came into her head. "Let's call the cove Chuck." Because you throw things into it." Was she making any sense at all? He nodded, considering, then broke into a ridiculous, light-filled, hideously beautiful smile. "Perfect." The ride home was like a kind of punishment. Cool air rushing through the windows, the radio turned down low, this strange, unwanted feeling beating a new rhythm in her chest. The dark road spooled out in front of them. She wished she were home. She wished they would never stop driving. Eli's transformation was a betrayal, a bait and switch. Eli Cuddy was supposed to be safe, and now he felt dangerous. She cast around for someone else to want. She'd had a crush on Mason Lee in the 9th grade, and he made Lila take her up to Okana Beach, where he was lifeguarding, in the hope that seeing him might jolt some sense into her. Unfortunately, the only amazing thing about Mason was the way he looked with his shirt off. He was like a golden retriever. She understood the appeal, but that didn't mean she wanted to take him home. Mornings when she knew she was going to see Eli felt suddenly breathless and full of possibility. She bought a new shirt in lush, just dusk purple, picked out slender silver earrings in the shape of feathers, bought apple blossom lip gloss because it looked like something magical in its pink and gold tin, and when she touched her fingers to her mouth, it felt like an incantation. See me. See me the way I see you. Gracie knew she was being stupid. If Eli liked her as more than a friend, he'd never given her any clue. He might even have a girlfriend in the city who he wrote long letters to and made out with between classes. He never said he did, but she'd never asked him, and it had never mattered before. She didn't want it to matter now. The summer took on a different shape, a desperate, jagged shape, the rise and fall of a dragon's back. The world felt full of hazards. Every song on every album bristled with portent. She found herself trying to communicate through the records she chose and interpreting the ones that he chose as code. She forced herself to spend more time with Mosey and Lila and at Veneers, cleaning things that didn't need to be cleaned, battling her new greed for Eli's company. But was it new? From the first, her hours with Eli had been warm sand islands, the refuge that had made the murky swim through the rest of the year bearable. She was torn between the need to say something, to speak this thing inside her before summer ended, and the conviction that she had to avoid that disastrous course of action at all costs. For the first time, she found herself counting down the days until September. If she could just make it to Labor Day without letting her heart spill out of her lips, she'd have the whole school year to get over this wretched, ridiculous thing that had taken her over. On the Saturday before Labor Day, Gracie and Eli watched the closing fireworks above Greater Spindle. They sat next to each other on the edge of the truck, knees almost touching, shoulders brushing. "I wish you had a phone," she said without meaning to. "Me too. Sort of. Only sort of. I like saving up all the things I want to tell you." "That has to be enough," Gracie told herself, as blue and silver light washed over the sharp gleam of his features. That should be better than enough. It got easier. She missed summer. She missed Eli, but it was a relief to be free of the prospect of seeing him. She went to junior prom with Ned Minnery, who was funny and played trumpet. He loved puns. He wore suspenders and striped pants and did magic tricks. He was the anti-Eli. There was nothing serious about him. It was a fun night, but Gracie wondered if maybe she wasn't any good at fun. She drank enough peach schnapps to talk herself into kissing Ned and then got sick by the side of the road. When Memorial Day came around, she felt ready to see Eli, but she didn't let herself go to the Dairy Queen. She couldn't have that kind of summer again. She wouldn't. She went to Okana Beach instead, planted herself next to Mosey and Lila on the sand, and stayed there as the sun sank low and the opening weekend bonfire began. When someone brought out a guitar, she found a spot atop a picnic table a little way off, bare feet on the bench, shivering in her sweatshirt. "I'm fine," she thought, telling herself she'd rejoin the others by the flames in just a minute. "I'm good." But when she saw Eli walking toward her with those long, loping strides, his hair bright in the firelight, face eager, carrying that stupid backpack, all those months of hard work vanished. How had he even gotten to Greater Spindle? Were his parents letting him use the car now? Longing unfurled inside of her, as if it had just been waiting for the warm weather to be aired out. He sat down beside her and said, "You are not going to believe what I found today. The Hall of Records has a whole collection of spoken word albums behind the Christmas section. It's amazing." Gracie made herself laugh. "Can't wait." "Did you miss me? Did you kiss anyone?" "I did, and it was terrible." She couldn't do it. She couldn't spend another summer this way. It would drive her insane. She would make up some excuse. Emergency hours at Veneers, a cholera outbreak, whatever it took. She pulled the pot of apple lip balm from her pocket. It was nearly empty, but she hadn't bothered to buy more. It was too embarrassing to remember the things she'd let herself think when she'd paid for it. Eli snatched it from her palm and hurled it into the darkness, into the lake. "Hey," Gracie protested, "why would you do that?" He took a deep breath. His shoulders lifted, fell. "Because I've spent 9 months thinking of apples." Silence dropped around them like a curtain. In the distance, Gracie could hear people talking, the lazy strum of guitar chords, but it was all another country, another planet. Eli Cuddy was looking at her with all of his focus, his blue eyes nearly black in the firelight. That hopeless thing in her chest fluttered, became something else, dared to bloom. Eli's long fingers cupped her face, traced the nape of her neck, kept her still, as if he needed to give her every bit of his attention, as if he could learn her like a language, plot her like a course. Eli kissed Gracie like she was a song, and he was determined to hear every note. He kissed her the way he did everything else, seriously. Now summer was round and full, fruit ready to burst, a sun emerging fat and yellow and happy from the sea. They kissed behind Uveneers and the red velvet seats of the spotlight on the floor of the record room, the sound of static filling the headphones around their necks as some song or other reached its end. "We could go to your house," she suggested. "We could go to yours." And they stayed where they were. On afternoons, when they left the DQ, Eli's lips were cold and tasted like cherry. On balmy evenings, when they lay on the banks of the cove named Chuck, his hands were warm and restless. Gracie floated in her sandals. She felt covered in jewels. Her bicycle was a winged horse. But sometime around the end of July, Gracie heard the drone of the insects turn sorrowful. Despite the heat and the sunburned backs of her thighs and the neon still lit on the main road, she felt summer begin to go. At night, she'd hear her mom and Eric laughing in the living room, the television like gray music, and she'd curl up on her side, that narrow panic settling in. With Eli, she could forget she was 17. She could forget little Spindle and what came next. A page out of her mother's life, if she was lucky. A car loan so she could go to community college. Watching the kids from her school leave for other places, better places. She wished Eli had a phone. She wished she could reach out to him in the dark. We could write letters. I could take the train to New York on the weekends. At night, she thought these things. But by the next afternoon, Eli was bright as a coin in the sunlight, and all she wanted was to kiss his studious mouth. Days and nights dissolved, and it wasn't until the Saturday before Labor Day that Gracie said, "Mosey's talking about applying to NYU." Eli leaned back on his elbows. They were lying on a blanket at the cove named Chuck, the sun making jagged scars through the branches of the oaks and birches. "Will she?" he asked. "Probably, but she's smart enough to get in." Eli said nothing, and Gracie added, "It might be fun to work in the city." The furrow appeared between Eli's brows. "Sure," he said. "That's a big change, though." "Don't say anything," she told herself. "Leave it be." But the knife was right there. She had to walk into it. "Do you not want me there?" Eli shifted forward and tossed a pebble into the lake. "You should go wherever you want." The hurt that bloomed in her chest was a living thing, a plant out of a science fiction movie, all waving tendrils and stinging nettles. "Sure," she said lightly. There was nothing wrong with what he'd said. This was a summer thing. Besides, he was right. She should go where she wanted. She didn't need Eli waiting for her to move to the city. She could crash on Mosey's couch until she found a job. Did dorm rooms have couches? "Gracie," Eli said, reaching for her hand. She hopped up. "I've got to go meet Mosey and Lila." He stood up. Sunlight clung to his hair, his skin. He was almost too bright to look at. "Let's meet early tomorrow," he said. I only have one more day to—" "Yep." She had her bag on her shoulders, and she was on her bike, determined to get away from him before he could see her pride go rolling down her face in big fat tears. She pedaled hard, afraid he'd come after her, hoping so hard that he would. She didn't go to work the next day. It wasn't a decision. She just let the minutes drain away. Eli wouldn't come to her house. He'd never seen her room or watched TV on their sofa, just hovered outside in the driveway with his bike while Gracie went to grab a sweater or change her shoes. She'd never even met his parents, because that was real life and they were something else. "You're being stupid," she told herself. "He'll be gone in 2 days. Enjoy it while it lasts. Let it be fun." But Gracie wasn't good at fun, and not the kind of fun that other people had. The person she liked best didn't like her enough to want more of her, and she didn't want to pretend that wasn't awful. She was cherry dip cones, all those old paperbacks, records stacked on dusty shelves. Something to hold Eli's interest, maybe even something he really liked, but a summer thing, not quite real when the weather turned. She read, she watched TV. Then the weekend was gone, and she knew Eli was gone with it. That was okay. Next summer, she wouldn't be waiting at the Dairy Queen or working at Juveneers. She'd graduate and she'd go to New York or Canada or wherever. But she wouldn't be in Little Spindle. Tale. A week after school started, Gracie went to see Annalie. She hadn't known that she meant to, but she ended up in the fluorescent lights of the Dairy Queen just the same. She didn't order. She wasn't hungry. She slid into the booth and said, "How do I get better? How do I make this stop hurting?" Annalie set down her crossword. "You should say goodbye. It's too late. He's gone." And sometimes it helps to say it anyway. "Can you tell me, did he ever feel the way I did?" "Ah, Sigala." Annalie tapped her pen gently on Gracie's hand. "Some of us wear our hearts. Some of us carry them." Gracie sighed. Had she really expected Annalie could make her feel better? This town was full of sham monsters, fake witches, stories that were just stories. But anything was worth a try. Though the weather was still warm, the main road was quiet, and as she turned onto the narrow dirt path that led to her cove, the woods seemed almost forlorn, as if they were keeping the last watch of summer. She felt guilty. This had been her cove, nameless and comforting before Eli. "Where have you been?" the pine needles whispered. She leaned her bike against a tree at the clearing and walked down to the shore. It didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. Hadn't Mosey said the lake was haunted? The cove felt full of ghosts she wished she could banish. She had so many good memories with Eli. Did she have to lose all of those, too? That was when Gracie heard it. The single, soft exhalation that might have been a breeze. Then another. A rasping breath. She peered past the shady banks. A body lay slumped in the shadows. She didn't remember moving, only that one moment she was standing stunned on the shore, and the next she was on her knees in the water. "Eli," she cried. "You came. What happened? What is this?" He was so pale he was nearly blue, his veins too close to the surface of his skin. "I shouldn't have waited. I got 3 months. That's the rule." "What rule?" "I wanted to say goodbye." "Eli." "I was selfish. I didn't want you to go to the city. I needed you to look forward to." "I'm sorry, Gracie. The winters get so long." "Eli, I have my phone. I can call." "I'm dying now, so I can tell you." "You're not dying," Gracie shouted. "You're dehydrated or you have hypothermia." But even as she said it, she realized the water was warmer than it should be. "It was me that day. You were skipping stones. You'd skinned your knee. I saw you for just a second. It was the last day of May." His eyelids started open, shut. "I shouldn't have kissed you, but I wanted to for so long. It was better than ice cream. It was better than books." She was crying now. "Eli, please let me." "It's too late." "Who says? Who says?" He gave the barest shrug. It became a shudder. "The lake. 3 months to walk the land. But always I must return to her." Gracie's mind flew back to that day at the cove, the creature in the water. It was impossible. "There are no books below," he said. "No words or language. No Dairy Queen. No bicycles. No music. It couldn't be." Gracie blinked and Eli's form seemed to flicker, ghostly almost, part boy and part something else. She remembered Annalie tapping her hand with the pen. "Some of us wear our hearts. Some of us carry them." Gracie's eyes scanned the beach, the tangle of brambles where the woods began. There, a dark little hump in the leaves. She'd never seen him without it, that ugly purple backpack, and in that moment she knew. She scrambled for it, fell, righted herself, grabbed it open, and split the zipper wide. It gaped like a mouth. It was full of junk. Skee-ball tickets, mini golf scorecards, a pink and gold lip gloss tin, but there at the bottom, glinting like a hidden moon. She pulled it from the bag, a long, papery cape of scales that seemed to go on and on, glittering and sharp beneath her fingers, surprising in its weight. She dragged it toward Eli. trailing it behind her, stumbling through the shallows. She pulled his body close and wrapped it around him. "Here," she sobbed, "here." 3 months, he said, "no more." "It was only a few days." "Leave, little spindle, Gracie. Get free of this place." "No," she shouted at the lake, at no one at all. "We can make a trade." Eli's hand gripped her wrist. "Stop. You can have me, too." "Gracie, don't." The water lapped against her thighs with its own slow pulse, warm as blood, warm as a womb, and she knew what to do. She curled herself into the cloak of scales beside Eli, letting its edges slice into her arms, letting her own blood drip into the water. "Take me, too," she whispered. "Too late," said Eli, his eyes closed. He smiled. It was worth it. Then the hand around her wrist flexed tight, retracted. Gracie watched it stretch and lengthen, a talon razor sharp. Eli's eyes flew open. The smell of rain clouds reached her, then the rumble of thunder, the roar of a river unleashed. The rush of water filled her ears as Eli's body shifted, blurred, shimmered in the fading light. He rose above her, reeling back on the muscular coils of his body, a great snake, a serpent of gleaming white scales, his head like a nodding dragon, his back split by iridescent fins that spread like wings behind him. "Eli," she tried to say, but the sound that left her mouth wasn't human. She raised her hand to her throat, but her arms were too short, the wrong shape. She turned and felt her body, strange and strong, thrash through the shallows as her back arched. In the sunlit water, she glimpsed her reflection, her scales deep gray and alive with rainbows, her fins the bruised violet of twilight, a veil of starlight cast against the darkening sky. She was monstrous. She was lovely. It was her last human thought. She was diving into the water. She was curled around. Who was this? Eli. The dim echo of a name, something more ancient and unpronounceable, lived at the base of her brain. It didn't matter. She could feel the slide of his scales over hers as they slipped deeper into the lake, into the pull of the current. Together. Heart. When they found her bicycle leaning against a pine near Little Spindle, Annalee did her best to explain to Gracie's mother. Of course, her mother still called the police. They even sent divers into the lake. The search was fruitless, though one of them claimed that something far too big to be a fish had brushed up against his leg. Gracie and Eli had summers, 3 perfect months every year to feel the grass beneath their feet and the sun on their bare human shoulders. They picked a new city each summer, but they returned most often to Manhattan, where they'd visit with Annalee and Gracie's flummoxed mother in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, and try not to stare at their beautiful host with her running water skin and river-green eyes. When fall came, they shed their names and their bodies and traveled the waters of the world. The lake hated to give them up. She threatened to freeze solid and bind them there, but they were 2 now, sinewy and gleaming, monsters of the deep with lashing tails and glittering eyes, and the force they created between them smashed old rules and new arguments. They slipped down the Mohawk to the Hudson, past the river god with his sloped gray shoulders, and out into the Atlantic. They met polar bears in the Arctic, frightened manatees near the Florida Keys. They curled together in a knot, watching the dream lights of jellyfish off the coast of Australia. Sometimes, if they spotted a passenger leaning on the rails of a freighter by himself, they might even let themselves be seen. They'd breach the waves, let the moonlight catch their hides, and the stranger would stand for a moment, mouth agape, heart alive, his loneliness forgotten. Well, I hope you enjoyed that 2-parter story. If you want to read more stories like it, I highly recommend Summer Days and Summer Nights, 12 Love Stories, or anything by Leigh Bardugo, an excellent YA author. She's also branched out into adult fiction. Both are excellent. You do not have to be a teen to read YA. So join us next time. We are going to read another story from this book in August, The End of Love by Nina LaCour. And I hope to see you then. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this story with you. Bye, everyone.